everybody. Oh my goodness, come on. Like, do not tell me that I'm like in the seriously worst time slot possible. What are you doing to me, buddy? Come on. Okay, all right. So, before I get started, a couple of things that I need to say. First, a really big thank you to Mrs. Esther Mills, who was my English teacher my sophomore year in high school. When I was 15 years old, I told her that I intended to be a dolphin trainer at SeaWorld when I grew up.
Were you?
She suggested that I become a teacher instead. Mrs. Mills, this is what happens when you put crazy ideas into the head of a student. Thank you. Second, I need to give a big shout out to my colleagues at the Daily Dot, who I assume are watching from various places around the world. Love you guys. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to learn something new every single day and occasionally allowing me to teach you something. So let's get down to the business of applied learning, or in my personal experience, it's really about how to bring applied learning to business. I am an adjunct faculty member at Western New England University in Springfield, Massachusetts. I teach in the management department, primarily organizational behavior, with undergraduate students. Now, one thing I'm sure that you have all noticed as educators is that these days, Google knows everything. It used to be that teenagers knew everything. Even they have now taken a back seat to Google. Turns out that my undergrads can dredge up far more interesting and in-depth information on the internet about organizational behavior theories than anything I might be able to provide in the classroom. Now, it used to really annoy me that my students didn't sit in awe of me as the sage on the stage the way I did as an undergrad at Mount Holyoke College. But I quickly discovered that there's something that does matter to them, that they want from me, and that is the fact that I have nearly 2 decades worth of real-world business experience. And I can give them expert feedback on how to apply their learning that they cannot get from our good friend Google. So how do I actually use this advantage as an educator? I've realized that I can turn my classroom inside out. So instead of actually taking class time to lecture to my students, I now take that time to have them apply the material, solve actual problems, analyze solutions, and this entire time I am there as their guide and to respond and to provide them with feedback. So let's look at this concept of applied learning in a little bit more detail. Flip-flopping the structure and making it a student's responsibility to learn the material outside of class can be a real challenge. Sadly, our students are really well trained in passivity. They'd much rather come to class, kick back, put their feet up, passively listen to your lecture, perhaps take a few notes, memorize a few facts, regurgitate for said exam, promptly forget everything they know. So asking them to actually take charge of their own learning makes most of them a little bit skeptical. So if you're thinking about actually applying this in your own classroom, I find it's best to do it at the beginning of the school year or at a minimum at the beginning of a new semester, so that you can set the tone from day one. Ask them to start talking, writing, analyzing, even interrogating, so that they can quickly adapt to this new classroom culture that you're shooting for. So to give you an example, in my organizational behavior classes, students are responsible for learning all the theory on their own. Now, the good thing is, at the college level, most educational technology is embedded as part of the course textbooks that they're purchasing, and this can make things a lot more fun and interesting for my students. Along with their $250 org behavior textbook, they also get PowerPoint slides, oftentimes complete with narrated lectures, and other information. If we're not using the textbook that has those kinds of chunky educational technology tools, I can easily create my own, or I can send them out to watch videos someplace like Khan Academy, YouTube, or my personal favorite, TED Talks. This actually means that my students can access the material when it's convenient for them. It doesn't simply need to be in those 90-minute time slots where I'm standing in front of them in a classroom. So if they'd like to do their learning at midnight, this is now a very realistic and reasonable option. It also means that they have the chance to watch or listen to portions of an entire lecture many, many times, which is great when they're trying to learn some of the more abstract theories or concepts that I'm asking them to delve into. It also means they can learn in chunks. So whether it's because they got interrupted by a phone call or they have a short attention span, they don't have to sit through an entire lecture in one shot. Now, we know that our students have short attention spans. Heck, we have short attention spans. After the first 10 or 12 minutes, we've usually lost most students in our classroom. I'd like to thank Jeff and Chris for limiting my rambling to 10 minutes today, which means that I should be able to hold your attention. In addition to all of this, I actually encourage my students to go online and find additional resources that can help them better understand the information. I used to be concerned when they would come in and say, oh, look, I found something really fantastic. I felt like it was going to take the place of what I could provide them. But instead, I've decided that I can use that as yet another resource. After all, the way that I learn organizational behavior, or what resonates with me, may not be what resonates with my 19 or 20-year-old undergraduate students. So using this approach means that they can bring me resources that I may otherwise never come across. And I can then take that information and incorporate it into future semesters' work. Now, of course, it comes with a caveat. If they bring me information saying, this is a great video, this is a great resource, I certainly make them justify and explain their reasoning behind why it's something we should actually be using to understand a particular theory. So now that we've actually taken all of the theory outside of the classroom and said, here you go, guys, you've got to learn this on your own, what happens inside the classroom when they're actually there live and in front of you? This is the time to actually apply some real learning and give them the guidance and the feedback that they so desperately crave. When I ask my students, what do you really want from me? They tell me, I want to know how it works in the real world. How does this stuff actually work when you're running a business? Does it matter? Is it important? Or am I just learning a bunch of stuff for the purposes of getting a diploma? So students actually need that help to figure out how do they apply these theories. This is where they're going to actually develop the critical thinking skills that we all want them to have. They won't get that by simply listening to me lecture at them. I'm not that fascinating. But they will develop them if I actually give them a challenging problem and ask them to solve it. I used to think that students wouldn't be able to muddle through all of the theoretical information on their own, but I discovered that the initial exposure is actually much easier than asking them to try to do the real-world application without my guidance. It's in the application phase that students tend to get stuck. That's where they need coaching. That's where they need feedback. That's where they need the help to get over a hurdle. It also means that the papers they write and the projects they complete are a whole lot more interesting to review. So I have a bit of an advantage. As an adjunct faculty member, teaching is not the only job that I have. I also currently work as the COO of the Daily Dot, which is an online media startup. Teaching in management and organizational behavior means that as an executive in business, I can bring everything together in my two worlds. My students get the benefit of applying theory and helping me solve real-world problems from a company that I'm helping to build. For example, the Daily Dot is a virtual company. We have employees from Paris to Vancouver and almost every time zone in between. but we rarely see each other face to face. We interact daily using a variety of technologies. But as an executive, how do you actually design a work environment that's going to be motivating for employees who aren't in the same building or even on the same continent? So I tasked my students with solving this problem. And they struggled to find a way that would actually work, that would actually result in an engaging and rewarding work environment. They presented possible solutions, and then I made them test it. I gave them a project and said, here you go. Complete this, but you can only do it as a virtual team. No fair having face-to-face meetings. Not here in class, not during the weekends at the library. The only way you can communicate with your team members to complete this project is by phone, email, text, Skype, social media. You pick the technology, but you can't have face-to-face meetings. They came back with a lot of information after this project because they realized that what worked and was motivating for some group members in a virtual environment was not always the case for all group members. That particular experience dovetailed very nicely into understanding and applying communication theories in organizations. Students learned all the theory, once again, outside of class time, but quickly discovered that it was more complicated in the real world. And they wrestled with how they needed to modify their own communication styles to match the various scenarios that I gave them. So while all of this real-world learning, this applied learning is going on, what am I actually doing as a teacher? Well, it's a great opportunity for me to walk around and interact with my students on a one-on-one basis, to provide them feedback, to give them guidance. No longer is my one-on-one interaction limited to those students who enthusiastically seek me out during office hours, or those students whom I enthusiastically seek out for a bit of an intervention. Now I get one-on-one time with all of my students and an opportunity to give them feedback in real time. For my students, it also gives me an opportunity to help them develop the critical thinking skills that's necessary to be successful in business environments. The benefit of applied learning for my students is that they start to develop these skills well in the classroom and then can take them out into their internships and their summer jobs. These critical thinking skills won't magically just develop the day they get a job. They need them before they ever walk in the door. And their boss is likely too busy to take the time to teach them. So in closing, when we flip-flop our instructional approach and make applied learning the primary instructional strategy during class time, it means we're keeping our students more involved day to day. They're less likely to zone out during class time or skip class altogether. They're less likely to bomb an exam and then completely disengage. Applied learning, in my experience, is simply a wise use of student time and a wise use of our talents. Thank you.